Hello, everyone. Welcome to Week 2 edition of the Player Prop Countdown, where I rank my top 10 favorite player props for this week's NFL action. Last week was my first time ever doing it. Decent result, not as good of a result as the road to 272 bets, but we still went 5 for 5 for minus 0.64 units, so lost just a little over half a unit, but I did hit my favorite prop. My number one ranked prop last week was might have been the easiest prop for us to hit. It was Caleb Williams under 245.5 passing yards, and he didn't even reach 100. So I am back with my top 10 player props for week 2. If you're here for the road to 272 bets, I released that episode Tuesday morning. So check out the previous episode of this, both on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And by the way, speaking of YouTube and wherever you listen to this podcast, subscribe to the Bacon Bets podcast on YouTube right now. Rate and review the audio version of this podcast. That would help me out greatly, and I would appreciate it. So let's not waste any time. These player prop countdown episodes are nice, quick, short, and sweet. So we're going to jump right into it with my number 10 player prop, which is a touchdown score. Last week I did not have any touchdown scores of my top 10 player props. This one, it is my number 10 ranked because it is a touchdown score and it's a long shot touchdown score. We're gonna take a shot on a dark horse. And by the way, I got some player props in some ugly games this week. Starting with this one, I'm gonna take Xavier Legette, the rookie wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, to score a touchdown at 7-1. This is a bet that I think not super likely to hit, but if you're talking about a bet that has value compared to what I think his actual odds should be, I think this is actually a great bet. I think there's plenty of value on Legette to find the end zone. Last week in week 1 for the Panthers, he played 59% of offensive snaps, only 10% less than Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. He was also the most targeted player, and he had the most receptions on the Carolina Panthers. He had 7 targets, 4 receptions, both led all Carolina Panthers players in week 1. Now the Panthers return home. They were on the road in New Orleans last week. They return home. They take on the Chargers, who allowed the Raiders to pass for 6.8 yards per pass attempt last week. But the reason why I like this the most, Legette 7-1, despite leading the team in targets, despite leading the team in receptions. He has longer odds than Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Tommy Tremble, Jatavion Sander, and Jonathan Mingo. Of the pass catchers, not including running backs, he has the 1 to 6th longest odds, despite last week playing 60% of snaps, getting the most targets, getting the most receptions. Now, of course, the problem with this, or the problem with betting on any member of the Carolina Panthers to catch a touchdown, is that Bryce Young's throwing him the ball. I'm going to try not to overreact to, I guess, not only week 1, but also all of last season. Bryce Young sucks. But they're at home. They're playing against the Chargers, who, the Chargers certainly aren't an elite team. If there's ever going to be a time the Panthers, get something going offensively, I think it's this time. And just based on his usage last week, I don't think the markets have adjusted correctly. I will take him to find the end zone, score his first touchdown of his NFL career at 7-1. Moving on, we are going to take an over on a receptions. Evan Ingram, tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to go over 4.5 receptions, minus 130. Ingram only got one reception on 4 targets last week against the Dolphins, but let's not forget, Evan Ingram led the Jaguars in receptions last season. He had 114, I believe it was, receptions. He averaged 6.7 catches per game last season. So just because he had one down week in week 1, his reception total is now down to 4.5. I expect his numbers at some point this season to maybe not reach the levels they were last season, but I mean, with him averaging 6.7 receptions per game last season, he doesn't need to get to that level for this bet to cash. He only needs to catch 5. He catches 5 this week against the Browns, who have good corners. It may, force the Jaguars to look to their tight end a little bit more often this week. If he can get 5 catches, this one's a winner. So my number 9 ranked player prop this week, Evan Ingram, over 4.5 receptions at minus 130. I am doing a couple of repeats. There are 2 bets that I bet, actually 3 bets that I bet last week that I'm on again this week. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And one of them is Aaron Rodgers to go under his passing yards total. It's not quite as high as it was last week, I think. I think last week it was a little bit higher. 225.5 is his passing yards total this week when Aaron Rodgers and the Jets take on the Titans. He threw for 167 yards against the 49ers. And I have a take that I think if you want to find an edge betting on sports, sometimes you have to have a take that's a little early. Because if you have a take by the time it's an obvious take that everyone agrees with, then it's going to be kind of too late, and you're not going to find value, especially in the player prop market. And the take I have is that the Titans might have an elite defense. I talked a lot about how I thought they improved a lot this offseason. I don't think enough people are talking about the pieces they added. Chidobe Awuzie, Legere Sneed, Kenneth Murray, the guy from the Rams whose name I'm blanking on, the other linebacker, one of their safeties, and I'm blanking on his name as well. Should have this list of names in front of me. But the Titans completely changed their starting defense this offseason. And then what did they do in week 1 against the Bears? Kept the Bears to what? 2.2 yards per pass attempt? By far the fewest offensive yards in the NFL. Now, of course, they ended up losing that game because Will Levis and their punter handed it to the Bears. And it is the Bears, rookie quarterback, a Bears team that I also predicted was going to be a little slow to the gates. But I do think it's a take that I have right now that may not age well, but it's a take I'm going to stick to see if I can get some betting value these next couple of weeks before it becomes obvious. Because maybe I'm right about this take. If I'm right about this take in about 2 to 3 weeks, the value's not going to be there anymore. But my take is the Titans might have an elite defense. And I'm going to bet like they are. And if Aaron Rodgers is playing on the road against an elite defense, his passing yards total should not be 225. Especially after we saw his performance on Monday night. Now, it wasn't bad. He had a little bit more zip on his ball than I thought he would, but still not quite the same Aaron Rodgers. He may need a few games to even get close to the level that he used to play at. So I'm going to take the under on his passing yards total. It hit for us last week. I'm going to bet on it hitting again. For my number 7 ranked player prop of the week, we're going to the Giants and Commanders game. And unfortunately, I have 3 player props for this game. Now, the thing with the format that I'm doing now, where Road to 272, I am betting on one pick for every single game. I'm not doing that with player prop countdown, which allows me to make more than one bet on a single game. Now, usually I would try not to go over 2, but I have a take for the Giants-Commanders game, which has led me to place 3 different prop bets on it. And that take you might have heard if you listened to this week's edition of the Road to 272 Bets, the fact that I think it's going to be an extremely high-scoring game because I think both defenses are completely abysmal. So I have three overs, starting with Malik Neighbors. Over 64.5 receiving yards is my number 7 ranked player prop this week, minus 114. Commander secondary is terrible. Both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield just tore the Commanders secondary apart. I had that belief about the Commanders heading into the season because last year they ranked 31st in the NFL in opponent yards per pass attempt. They did nothing to fix their secondary this offseason. Why doesn't their secondary suck again this year? And we saw in week 1 they do in fact suck. So if the Giants are going to get their passing game going against anyone, it's going to be the Commanders. Malik Neighbors look good. There's a huge narrative going around that they didn't get the ball to him enough. I think they're going to force feed Malik Neighbors in week 2. So because of that, and even last week when they didn't force feed him, he had 66 receiving yards. If he hits the same receiving yards that he had last week against the Vikings, this bet hits. Malik Neighbors over 64.5 for the Giants against the Commanders. We will come back to that game shortly. But first, we're going to go back to a bet that I placed last week. This bet did not hit last week. We missed this bet by a yard last week. It was James Conner over on his rushing yards total. I got it at 50.5. He finished with 50. That was a stinger. If he got one more yard, we would win that bet. We would have went 6-4 in player props. We would have been profitable with player props. I'm going to go back to it because I do believe in James Conner, and I think he has an even better matchup this week than he had last week. Unfortunately, the total is a little bit higher, but for good reason. So I'm going to go Conner over 63.5 rushing yards at even money. This is plus money, even money. I believe it is at BetMGM that you can get this at even money. Let me double check for those of you who want to get the best value possible. Over 63.5 at even money. Yeah, and I have 2 player props for this game as well. So 5 of my 10 player props this week are in 2 different games. Perfect. And sorry, it's at DraftKings, not BetMGM. DraftKings has that prop at even money. The other ones are all like minus 110, minus 115. Week 1 proved to me that James Conner is a clear bell cow back. 16 carries. Trey Benson is back up, only had 3 carries. And I think what we saw with the Rams on Sunday night is that where they miss Aaron Donald the most is in their run defense. The Lions ran the ball down their throat, especially in overtime. They were helpless. They couldn't do anything. They looked defeated on defense. Lions averaged 5.3 yards per carry. And I think there is a higher likelihood that the game script is going to lead to the Cardinals being able to run the ball more in the second half. Connor was well on his way to going over this total against the Bills. Unfortunately, the Bills took a bit of a commanding lead, which forced the Cardinals to then throw the ball probably more than they would have liked in the second half. I expect this game to be closer, if not Cardinals leading most of the way. And if that's the case, that should lead to them to run the ball more. James Conner's the clear number 1 running option, and he gets to run against a Rams defense that was terrible against the run last week. So I'll take James Conner over 63.5 rush yards at even money. We're going back to another one that I hit last week. We're going back to my favorite bet last week. My favorite bet last week, which was also the easiest winner, was Caleb Williams to go under his passing yards total. I still like it. It was the reason why it was my number 1 favorite bet last week was because I could not believe that the sports books put Caleb Williams' passing yards total at 245.5. I may never see another player prop in my lifetime that I liked as much as that one last week. And he didn't even reach 100. Now I have demoted it down to number 5 ranked player prop this week because the sports books have responded. But still not enough. I think I'm going to keep betting the under until he either proves that he can go over 200 yards or until the total is under 200 yards. This week his passing yards total is 219.5 passing yards. And he is taking on the Houston Texans on Sunday night. Now, you may look at Houston Texans metrics and see that they gave up like 10 yards a throw to the Colts in week 1. But as I talked about in the road to 272 bets, those were all deep shots, which led to that. Anthony Richardson only went 9 of 19. He averaged like 23 yards per completion. If they just prevent a couple of those bombs, which I expect they're going to fix this week, and I don't even know if Caleb Williams has the ability to cash in on as many long bombs that Anthony Richardson was able to, then Richardson's passing yards total would have been way under. So when you look at the surface level stats for the Texans defense last week, a little bit misleading in my opinion. I think their pass defense is a little bit better than those box score numbers showed. And still, it wasn't just the Titans defense last week. Caleb Williams completed 48.3% of passes. He looked impatient. He looked scared at times. He looked like he was scrambling with his feet, like he wasn't, staying patient in the pocket and letting his reads develop. I predicted the Bears are going to be slow to the gates offensively because of how many new pieces they had, because of the new offensive coordinator, because Caleb Williams is a rookie. That was proven correct, at least in week 1. I will keep riding that belief in week 2. They have adjusted his passing yards total down to 219.5. I still think that's too high of a number. I will take the under Caleb Williams 219.5 passing yards as my 5th ranked player prop. We're going back to Giants Commanders. It may be a toilet bowl, but hey, sometimes the bad games are the ones that present the best betting value. I took Malik Neighbors to go over his receiving yards total. I'm going to kind of, double down on that sort of a bet. I'm going to go Daniel Jones to go over his passing yards total. Over 207.5 passing yards. That is an extremely low number, especially considering how bad the Commanders' defense is. It was terrible in week 1, Daniel Jones. Completed just 52.4% of passes, 186 yards, and 2 interceptions. Let's not overreact too much. Is Daniel Jones a good quarterback? No. He's better than what he was last week, though. I think he has a decent bounce-back performance against the Commanders' secondary, which I talked about earlier when I was talking about Malik Neighbors. They stink. 31st in opponent yards per pass attempt last season. They allowed the Buccaneers to average 9.3 yards per pass attempt last week. If there's any team that Daniel Jones can have a competent performance against, it is the Washington Commanders. I will take over 207.5 passing yards at minus 115 for Daniel Jones. And that is my second of 3 bets for that game. But first, we're going to go to my number 3 ranked player prop, which is in the Raiders-Ravens game. Now, you think the Ravens a 9-point favorite. You think I'd go ahead and back the Ravens, or at least a Ravens player. Not the case. I just took Daniel Jones over his short passing yards total. I'm going to go Gardner Minshew over his over 202.5 passing yards against the Ravens. I said earlier about how sometimes you got to have a take that may be a little early and it may prove to be incorrect. But if you're right about the take, when you have to bet it is before it kind of becomes common knowledge. And my take is the Ravens defense may be in trouble. Now, it's hard to evaluate them too much. They played on opening night. They played against the defending champs. They played against the best quarterback of our generation, Patrick Mahomes. But they have a new defensive coordinator. Don't forget their defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, is now the head coach in Seattle. So new defensive coordinator this year. No Patrick Queen. And I think their defense, even though we can give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit, we can cut them a little bit of slack for taking on the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes last week. They still gave up 10 yards per pass attempt. Patrick Mahomes threw for 291 total passing yards. Once again, Patrick Mahomes, yes. Gardner Minshew is certainly no Patrick Mahomes. But they gave up almost 300 yards through the air last week, and now for Gardner Minshew, you're going to set his passing yards total at 90 yards below what the Chiefs were able to get last week. Not only that, if the Ravens are 9-point favorites, you assume they're going to have the lead. If they have the lead in the second half, the Raiders are going to have to throw the ball to have any chance in the game. Garbage time pass yards are huge. Garbage time stats are huge in general for player props. Also, don't forget Gardner Minshew threw for 257 yards against the Chargers last week, a Chargers team that you assume, not a great defense, but I think the Chargers, you can say, especially under Jim Harbaugh, an above-average defense. And yes, the Raiders only scored 10 points, but he did throw for 257 passing yards. We're not asking for a lot from Gardner Minshew. We're asking for 203 yards. If my early inkling that the Ravens defense is not going to be as good as they were last year, and this could be an overreaction to week one, if that inkling becomes true, a good way to take advantage of that the next couple of weeks before people catch on, before the market catches on, is to take the quarterback they're facing, take the over on their passing yards. I'm going to do that with Gardner Minshew. I could be wrong. This take could be wrong. But if I'm right, this will be a winner. Moving on to my third and final bet for the Giants-Commanders game. And I like this one because this is my number 2 ranked pick. For week 2. I do love this one. We're going on the Commanders offense this time. The first 2 were on the Giants. I'm going to take Jaden Daniels over 50.5 rushing yards at minus 113. Jaden Daniels ran the ball 16 times in week 1 against the Buccaneers. That is 16 times is way too much for a quarterback. And guess what? I bet you he'll run it 16 times again. These rookie quarterbacks, ones who relied on their legs in college, and a lot of them, to a certain successful, a degree of success. When you watch them play, they drop back. They usually look at 1 read, maybe 2, and then they shift their eyes down and look for a lane to run. I've seen it time and time and time again over the past 2 decades. The good quarterbacks are the ones who can learn to use their legs to give themselves more time to throw the ball. But that takes time. Even Lamar Jackson, early in his career, like his first year starting, more often than he probably should have, looked for 1 read, maybe 2, and then looked for a lane to run. Now you see Lamar Jackson looks for 1 read, looks for a second, then uses his legs in the backfield to then create some more time so then he can find a third. It's what Patrick Mahomes does better than anyone has ever done in the history of the NFL. When he squirts out of the pocket and, is scrambling around back there, Patrick Mahomes is going to find Travis Kelce 30 yards down the field for completion. I'm not saying Jaden Daniels can't learn how to do that. And if he does, he's going to be a very effective, very good quarterback in the NFL. But these first few games, more often than not, he's going to look at 1 read, maybe 2, and then look for a lane to run. We saw week 1 against the Buccaneers, and he ran the ball 16 times for 88 yards. Now maybe if he can get a helmet that doesn't fall off his head every time he goes to run, maybe he'll get even more than 88 yards. He's also not being helped by Cliff Kingsbury putting Terry McLaurin, their only good receiver, on the left side. Why? It's like 85% of snaps Terry McLaurin was on his left. Why? He's a right-handed quarterback. Why is he on the left-hand side of the field? It's stupid. So I think we're going to see Jaden Daniels run a lot, especially because it's not like the Giants' pass rush is like really going to, freak him out. 50 and a half rushing yards. That's 38 yards fewer than what he got against the Bucs. We're not asking a lot. Jaden Daniels over 50 and a half rushing yards minus 113. Now, my favorite player prop, my number one player prop for week 2. Let's see if we can keep it. Let's see if we can get a streak going here of my number one ranked player props hitting. This one is a minus 160, so you do got to swallow a little juice on this one. But if you like it as much as I do, maybe make it a 2-unit play. For the sake of this show, for the sake of my record for the show, I keep all bets to 1 unit, just like the road to 272 bets. And if you're fine with putting 1 unit on a minus 160 play, then that's good too. Personally, though, even though for my record for the show, I'll keep it to a 1-unit play. Personally, I'll probably put 2 units on it. It's Cooper Kupp. Over 7.5 receptions against the Cardinals at minus 160. Puka Nacua got hurt early in the game against the Lions on Sunday night. Cooper Kupp was then targeted 21 times. I believe the second most in week 1 was 12. I think he had 9 more targets than any other receiver in the NFL last week. And don't forget, before Puka Nacua established himself, this was kind of the weekly norm for the Rams. They would just every throw would go to Cooper Kupp. And he'd catch all of them too. Last week, 21 targets. He hauled in 14 of them. He had 14 catches last week. Now he gets to play against one of the worst secondaries in the NFL in the Cardinals. The Cardinals allowed the Bills to complete 78.26% of passes, and the Bills certainly ain't got no Cooper Kupp. Bills got Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins. Who's the other guy? I know Dalton Kincaid didn't do anything because he's on my fantasy team. Who's the other receiver? I want to say Gabe Davis, but he's in Jacksonville now. Curtis Samuel? I think you get my point. If they allowed now, Josh Allen's obviously a very good quarterback, but if they allowed, the Bills receiving core to do what they did, if they then do not improve between then and now, and you got Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp's going to get 8 catches. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Easy. It's minus 160. Put 2 units on it if you're as confident as I am. But come on, this guy was targeted 21 times last week. Puka Nacua's out again. You think they're gonna share the load with DeMarcus Robinson? Who's the guy they were hyping up in training camp who I spent half my free agent budget in my dynasty league on, who touched the ball once and is called back for a penalty? Jordan Whittington? You think they're going to give him 10 targets? No. Cooper Kupp might have 25 targets this game. He's going to get 8 receptions, unless he gets hurt. So my favorite player prop, my number one player prop for week 2 is Cooper Kupp over 7.5 receptions, minus 160. So quick recap. Xavier Legette, anytime touchdown, is number 10. Number 9, Evan Ingram over 4.5 receptions, minus 130. 8, Aaron Rodgers under 225.5 passing yards. 7, Malik Neighbors over 64.5 receiving yards. 6, James Conner over 63.5 rush yards. 5, Caleb Williams under 219.5 passing yards. 4, Daniel Jones over 207.5 passing yards. 3, Gardner Minshew over 202.5 passing yards. 2, Jaden Daniels over 50.5 rushing yards. My number one player prop for week 2 is Cooper Kupp over 7.5 receptions. I'm now going to go over, as I did last week, my favorite DFS lineup. Last week sucked, so you may not want to listen to me this week, but I learned some things last week, and I actually like my lineup this week quite a bit better. Now, last week I made, which I'm going to blame it on. I don't know if it's, necessarily was what caused the issue, but I'm going to blame the issue on the fact that I made the lineup live while recording. I did not do that this week. I have already made the lineup. Let me see if I can bring it up here, and I'll just go over it with you. There we go. Once again, this is probably a little bit better if you're on YouTube. I will try to describe it as much as I can for the audio listeners, but if you're listening to this on audio, just go subscribe on YouTube anyways. Starting with my quarterback. My quarterback is Kyler Murray, who I think is, for some reason, cheaper than he should be in DFS. Let me widen that out a little bit there. He's $6,600 in DFS. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Only the seventh most expensive. But yet, not only does he get rushing yards, not only does he get passing yards, he gets to go to a Rams defense that has some issues right now. And what I think is going to be an offensive shootout. I mean, this is going to be a general good strategy, I think, for DFS. For those of you who are also bettors, which I'm assuming if you listen to this podcast, you are. If there are a few overs that you like, generally you should probably take some players in those games that you think are going to go over the total. If you think there's lots of points, that's lots of, potential for fantasy points. If there's games that you think are going to go under the total, then maybe you shouldn't take players from those games if you think they're going to be low scoring. Now, as I said that, I wanted to look through and make sure I didn't take any players in games that I took the under in, because then I'd be a hypocrite, but I didn't. Rams, Cardinals, I took the over. I like Kyler Murray. I think at that price, that's pretty good. Jacoby Brissett last week was a mistake. That's on me. I big-brained week one a little bit. Cheap option of running back, I went Gus Edwards. Who I know J.K. Dobbins was kind of the star last week, but I mean, hey, Gus Edwards still had 11 carries. So still, they still split some time between J.K. Dobbins. You can either spend a ton of money on J.K. Dobbins. He is... Actually, J.K. Dobbins is only 5,400. And J.K. Dobbins he had one fewer carry, but he had way more yards. I'm going to stick with Gus Edwards, but if you can squeeze J.K. Dobbins in there for, only $200 more, for some, I don't know why, when I looked through this, I thought J.K. Dobbins was way more expensive. I went Gus Edwards. Hey, he had more carries. And if they're up against the Panthers, they're probably going to have to run the ball. So you could probably go with either one. It's probably, it's hard to say if Dobbins is going to outperform Edwards that much every single week. Saquon Barkley, I went for an expensive. He's my most expensive player. I mean, Saquon Barkley is the clear bell cow workhorse back now for Philadelphia. He gets to go against the Falcons, who I've, almost no faith in at this point. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to get receptions. He's going to get rushing yards. He's going to get touchdowns. It seems like even more so than the tush push this year, they're just going to give it to Barkley. I think Barkley, if week one is in any indication, Barkley might win Offensive Player of the Year if he can stay healthy. So I splurged on him. Chris Godwin is somehow only $6,000, which is crazy to me. Mike Evans is $1,500 more. Chris Godwin outperformed him last week. But I mean, they get basically the same amount of receptions and targets every single week. But Mike Evans is for some reason, the reason why last year, because he got way more touchdowns. I don't know if that was, variance and luck, or if they actually target Mike Evans more in the end zone. Chris Godwin scored last week, and now him and the Bucs get to take on a Lions team who I still have a lot of question marks about their secondary. So I love Chris Godwin at $6,000. Very cheap option, Chargers. Kind of loaded up in the Chargers here against the Panthers. Ladd McConkey, who led the Chargers in both targets and receptions last week against the Raiders. He's $4,900. Very cheap option for the guy who looks to be potentially the number one target in Los Angeles. Getting to go up against the Panthers should be a great matchup for him. Scored a touchdown last week. I got Malik Neighbors at $5,900 for the reason I talked about earlier. The same reason why I like the over on his receiving yards total. I think they're going to feed him the ball. I think the Commanders' secondary absolutely stinks. For a cheap tight end, I went Brock Bowers, who not enough people are talking about the fact he had 8 targets last week, 6 receptions, 58 yards. He seems like he might be a beast. He might be a top 3 pick at tight end next year in fantasy. So while he's still available at a cheap price of $4,400, I'll take Brock Bowers. I am banking a little bit on Drake London having a bounce back week. Come on, he's the number one target in Atlanta. They got to find a way to get Drake London the ball. I'm going to refuse to believe Kirk Cousins is as bad as he looked last week. Shake off the rust, Kirk. Get Drake the ball, 6,100 in the flex position. And then for defense, Chargers, straightforward. Bryce Young sucks. I mean, two of the worst picks I saw all week were Bryce Young. Get some turnovers. Panthers probably aren't going to score a ton of points. So what do you think of this lineup? I got Kyler Murray, Gus Edwards, Saquon Barkley, Chris Godwin, Ladd McConkey, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Drake London, Chargers defense. I like this one a lot better than I liked the one last week, and a lot less of a big brain lineup, I think. So there is my DFS lineup. And that's it. Little player prop countdown show for you guys. Go back and watch Road to 272. If you haven't already, I went 9-6-1 last week in the Road to 272, 5-5 in player prop. So I did, if you watch both shows and tailed all my bets, you were profitable by about 2 units. Maybe a little less than 2 units you were profitable last week. So hey, not going to complain about that. Let's keep it rolling. Week 2 of the NFL season. Gamble or bless. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Rate and review the podcast. And I'll talk to you next week, Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. on YouTube, will be the Week 3 edition of the Road to 272. I'll talk to you then.